Forgiveness is often seen as one of the highest virtues. From a young age, we're taught that it's noble to forgive, that letting go is the key to peace, and that holding on only creates pain. And on the surface, that's true. Forgiveness can release tension. It can close emotional wounds and make space for growth. But what most people don't talk about is what happens when forgiveness becomes a reflex, when you give it automatically, before you've even processed what you're forgiving. When you always forgive, something subtle begins to shift. At first, it feels like strength, like you're above the chaos. But slowly, that strength turns into something else. Numbness. You stop asking yourself whether the situation even deserves forgiveness. You stop asking whether it's fair or whether you're being respected. You just keep letting things slide, believing that patience will eventually be rewarded. Carl Jung often wrote about the danger of one-sidedness, the idea that overdeveloping one trait, even a positive one, leads to imbalance. Forgiveness, when practiced without discernment, becomes exactly that, an imbalance. It turns from a conscious act of understanding into a mechanical habit of self-suppression. You start believing that peace at any cost is worth it, even if that cost is your own dignity. But there's a quiet truth here. If you forgive everything, you teach people that nothing matters. When someone knows you'll always let things go, they stop treating your boundaries as real. They stop reflecting on their behavior because there's no consequence, no friction, no moment of discomfort to trigger awareness. In that space, respect begins to fade, slowly, invisibly, but certainly. Forgiveness is supposed to heal, but constant forgiveness can actually erode your sense of self. You begin to associate goodness with silence. You start equating kindness with compliance. And over time, your inner world becomes divided. One part of you wants to stay calm and agreeable, while another part quietly resents being ignored. Jung believed that unresolved tension between these inner parts creates psychological fragmentation. You begin to live through a persona, a polished, forgiving mask, while the rest of your mind grows restless and unacknowledged beneath it. That mask might earn approval, but it also keeps you trapped. You become the forgiving one, the person who never objects, never challenges, never disrupts. But that identity doesn't come from authenticity. It comes from fear. Fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as unkind. And so, paradoxically, what started as a strength, your ability to forgive, becomes the very thing that undermines your self-respect. You begin to lose touch with your own anger, your own standards, your own needs. You stop drawing the line because you've trained yourself to believe that drawing it is wrong. But here's the deeper insight Jung would point to. Every human quality, even the most virtuous, has a shadow. Forgiveness has one too. Its shadow is passivity, the quiet surrender of boundaries in the name of peace. And when that shadow goes unacknowledged, forgiveness turns into something hollow. It's no longer a conscious choice. It's a reflex born of avoidance. Real forgiveness, Jung might say, requires awareness. It's not about pretending the wrong never happened. It's about seeing it clearly, understanding it, and then deciding how to respond. Sometimes that response is compassion. Other times it's distance. And sometimes it's saying, no more. Forgiveness that comes from strength restores respect, both for yourself and for others. Forgiveness that comes from weakness destroys it. Because when you forgive without limits, you teach others that there are no limits. And when there are no limits, there can be no respect. So the paradox is simple. Forgiveness is powerful only when it's selective, deliberate, and conscious. When it's given to maintain peace rather than truth, it loses its soul. To forgive meaningfully, you have to be willing not to forgive when the situation calls for self-respect instead. That's not cruelty. That's balance. And balance, as Jung understood it, is the foundation of a healthy mind. Being nice sounds harmless, even admirable. It's the quality people praise the most: kind, patient, forgiving, easy to get along with. But beneath that politeness, something deeper can start to happen, something that Carl Jung warned about again and again: the loss of authenticity. When you're too nice, you start editing yourself constantly. You suppress irritation, disappointment, even anger. Not because those emotions disappear, but because you've trained yourself to believe they're unacceptable. You start thinking, if I just stay calm, if I just stay understanding, everything will be fine. But what fine really means in that moment is that everyone else is comfortable, except you. Jung described the persona as the social mask, the version of ourselves we present to be accepted by others. For the too nice person, that mask becomes their entire identity. They're the peacekeeper, the understanding one, the person who absorbs tension so others don't have to feel it. And the longer that role is played, the harder it becomes to take it off. You start to feel trapped by your own image. You smile when you don't want to. You agree when something feels wrong. You say, "It's okay," when it's really not. And every time you do, you drift further away from your genuine self, the part that actually feels, reacts, and draws the line. This disconnection has a cost. At first, it shows up as mild exhaustion, a sense of being emotionally drained after every interaction. But over time, it grows into something heavier: resentment. You start resenting others for crossing your boundaries, even though you never clearly set them. You start resenting yourself for staying silent, even though silence was your choice. That inner tension between the person you show and the person you suppress becomes a constant psychological pressure. Jung believed that when a person over-identifies with the persona, the rest of the psyche rebels. The emotions you bury don't disappear. They wait. They build energy in the unconscious until they find another way out, through irritability, anxiety, or sudden bursts of anger that feel out of character. This isn't a failure of character. It's a natural reaction to imbalance. You can't keep part of yourself locked away forever without consequences. Being too nice also creates confusion about self-worth. If your sense of value depends on being liked, then every disagreement feels like a threat. You start over-forgiving, over-explaining, over-accommodating, just to keep approval intact. And soon, you begin to equate self-worth with usefulness. I matter because I make things easier for everyone else. But that belief is fragile. The moment you stop giving, you fear you'll stop being valued. This is where the real cost reveals itself. By protecting others from discomfort, you create your own. By always forgiving, you teach yourself that your feelings are secondary. And by always being agreeable, you stop being fully human, because being human means having boundaries, edges, and limits. Jung would say this imbalance prevents individuation, the process of becoming whole. Wholeness requires contrast, kindness and assertiveness, patience and anger, compassion and firmness. When one side dominates, the psyche suffers. Endless niceness is not harmony. It's repression disguised as peace. And repression always demands repayment. The more you silence your genuine reactions, the more disconnected you feel from your own instincts. You lose the natural sense of what's fair, what's acceptable, what's too much. Everything blurs together under the pressure to be agreeable. Eventually, the nice mask starts to crack. You might feel sudden bursts of irritation or moments of quiet bitterness. You might begin to notice that people don't take your words seriously anymore, that they listen but don't really hear. It's not that they're cruel, it's that they've learned that your boundaries are negotiable. And here lies the irony. Being endlessly forgiving doesn't make you more respected. It makes you invisible. People respect clarity, not compliance. They respect authenticity, not self-erasure. Niceness without self-respect is just a strategy for survival, and it comes at the expense of inner peace. Respect is one of those words everyone values, but few people truly understand. We tend to think of it as something others give us, something we earn through kindness, patience, or understanding. But at its core, respect begins with how we treat ourselves. It's a reflection of self-consistency, the degree to which our actions align with our inner truth. When you forgive constantly, even at your own expense, that alignment begins to fracture. You say you value honesty, but you stay silent to keep the peace. You say you value fairness, but you tolerate imbalance. You say you value respect, but you accept behavior that undermines it. And over time, your own psyche begins to notice the contradiction. Carl Jung emphasized that the psyche strives for equilibrium, for a state where thoughts, emotions, and actions coexist in harmony. When that balance is disturbed, the unconscious begins to signal distress. You may not notice it immediately. It might appear as tension, fatigue, or quiet resentment. But beneath the surface, your mind is protesting the mismatch between who you are and what you're allowing. Respect, both from others and within yourself, depends on boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They're definitions, the lines that give shape to who you are. They say, this is acceptable, this is not, this is me, that is you. Without those lines, identity blurs. And when identity blurs, people stop knowing how to treat you. Jung would describe this as the erosion of psychic structure. A person without boundaries becomes overly adaptable, merging with the expectations of others. It feels easier in the short term, less conflict, more harmony. But it comes at a cost. You lose the center of your own gravity. The self becomes dispersed, scattered across the approval of others. This dispersion affects how respect operates. People unconsciously sense when someone lacks inner structure. It's not about dominance or power. It's about clarity. When your boundaries are firm and consistent, others recognize where you stand. They understand that your forgiveness, your patience, your kindness, all come from choice, not from fear. But when those traits come without limit, they lose their value. Think of it this way. Consistency is the language of respect. Every time you compromise your principles for the sake of harmony, you teach others that your words are flexible. Every time you say, it's fine, when it isn't, you teach others to take your comfort for granted. And every time you forgive without consequence, you teach them that their behavior carries no weight. Respect erodes not through cruelty, but through predictability. When others already know, you'll absorb whatever happens. In Jungian terms, this imbalance prevents individuation, the process of developing a solid, integrated self. Individuation requires tension, the ongoing dialogue between compassion and firmness, empathy and assertiveness. When one side dominates, the psyche becomes lopsided. If compassion completely overrules firmness, forgiveness loses its grounding in self-respect. You end up forgiving not out of wisdom, but out of fear of disapproval. Jung would remind us that respect cannot exist without confrontation. Not confrontation as aggression, but confrontation as truth. The willingness to express what's real, even when it risks discomfort. Avoiding conflict to preserve harmony destroys the very foundation of that harmony, because it's built on suppression instead of honesty. To be respected, you must be willing to disrupt peace when necessary. Otherwise, peace becomes an illusion maintained by silence. And here's the subtle truth. People don't respect perfection. They respect coherence. They respect when your words, emotions, and actions align. They respect when you say no and mean it, and when you say yes from genuine choice, not pressure. Respect grows not from how forgiving you are, but from how congruent you are with your values. So when forgiveness becomes endless, it stops being a reflection of strength and becomes a symptom of imbalance. It signals that your boundaries no longer protect your integrity. You may still appear kind, composed, and understanding, but beneath that calm exterior, the self is quietly dissolving. Carl Jung introduced the idea of the shadow, the part of the psyche that holds everything we reject, deny, or find uncomfortable about ourselves. It isn't evil or negative. It's simply the collection of traits, impulses, and emotions we've pushed out of sight to maintain a certain image of who we think we should be. When someone is too nice, their shadow often contains everything that doesn't fit that role: assertiveness, anger, frustration, and the instinct to protect themselves. They push those traits down because they believe expressing them would make them unkind, selfish, or difficult. But suppressing them doesn't erase them. It just hides them. Over time, that hidden part of the self starts to grow restless. You can feel it in moments when you suddenly lose patience, when resentment builds quietly, or when you feel drained by constantly keeping the peace. Those are signals from the shadow, reminders that you've been ignoring an essential part of your nature. Jung believed that psychological health depends on integration, not perfection. To become whole, you have to acknowledge what you've disowned. That means recognizing that anger, for example, isn't the opposite of kindness. It's a boundary marker, an emotional signal that something matters to you, that something has crossed a line. When you ignore that signal, you weaken your ability to protect your values. The shadow isn't dangerous because of what it contains. It's dangerous because of what happens when it stays unconscious. When you refuse to acknowledge it, it finds other ways to express itself, often in subtle, indirect forms: sarcasm, passive aggression, exhaustion, or quiet resentment. These behaviors don't come from malice. They're simply the psyche's attempt to balance itself when direct expression has been forbidden. Integrating the shadow means learning to face those feelings without shame. It means admitting, yes, I get angry sometimes, or yes, I want to say no, or yes, I'm tired of being the one who always forgives. This honesty isn't weakness, it's alignment. You're no longer pretending to be endlessly patient or unbothered. You're choosing to live in truth. Once that suppressed part of yourself is brought into awareness, it becomes strength. The same assertiveness you once feared becomes a tool for setting boundaries. The same anger you once suppressed becomes energy for change. And the same self-protection you once labeled as selfish becomes a form of emotional intelligence. Jung described this process as confronting the dark parts of the psyche, not to eliminate them, but to bring them into harmony with the rest of the personality. Without that integration, you remain divided. One part of you performs niceness, while another part quietly rebels. But when you integrate your shadow, forgiveness stops being a habit of fear and becomes a conscious decision made from balance. You're no longer forgiving to avoid tension. You're forgiving because you've truly processed what happened. You're no longer nice because you have to be. You're kind because you choose to be. And you're no longer afraid of your own intensity because you understand it's part of your humanity. To reclaim the denied self is to reclaim respect, not only from others but from within. It's saying, I can be compassionate and firm. I can care deeply and still draw the line. I can forgive, but I can also protect myself. That's the essence of integration, and that's how the too nice person transforms, not by becoming harder, but by becoming whole. Forgiveness in its healthiest form isn't about forgetting or excusing what happened. It's about releasing the emotional weight of the experience without erasing the lesson it taught you. But for many people who are habitually too nice, forgiveness becomes something else entirely. It becomes a reflex, an automatic attempt to smooth tension, to restore comfort, to keep everyone calm. Carl Jung often wrote about psychological maturity as the ability to hold opposites, to live within the tension of kindness and strength, compassion and discernment. Forgiveness with boundaries is exactly that balance. It says, I can release resentment without inviting more harm. I can let go of bitterness without erasing accountability. Boundaries don't cancel forgiveness. They clarify it. They ensure that your forgiveness has weight, that it means something. Because forgiveness without boundaries tells others, you can do this again. But forgiveness with boundaries says, I understand, and I'm choosing to move forward, but not at my own expense. To practice this kind of forgiveness, you have to learn to pause before giving it. You have to ask yourself, am I forgiving because I've healed? Or am I forgiving because I want this discomfort to end? The first is strength. The second is avoidance. Mature forgiveness comes from awareness, not reaction. It comes after reflection, when you've processed your emotions and understood the impact of the event. It doesn't rush to restore harmony. It restores balance. And balance, as Jung would say, is the foundation of individuation, the process of becoming a whole and integrated self. In this sense, forgiveness becomes less about the other person and more about your own inner structure. It's a psychological act of integrity, of deciding what aligns with your values and what doesn't. You can wish someone well without giving them access to you again. You can release anger without pretending the behavior was acceptable. You can choose peace without choosing passivity. Many people fear that setting boundaries makes forgiveness conditional, but in truth, it makes it real. Because unconditional forgiveness, offered without reflection, often comes from guilt or fear. It ignores the natural balance between compassion and justice within the psyche. Boundaries restore that balance. They say, I can be understanding without being permissive. Jung believed that individuation requires the integration of all opposites, the ability to be soft and strong, yielding and firm, forgiving and discerning. That integration is the mark of psychological adulthood. It means you no longer live from the extremes. You don't harden into bitterness, and you don't dissolve into endless accommodation. You operate from clarity. Forgiveness with boundaries transforms relationships, but more importantly, it transforms your inner life. It teaches you that kindness doesn't require compliance, and compassion doesn't require self-neglect. It allows you to remain open-hearted without being unguarded, and understanding without being overrun. That's what mature forgiveness looks like. It's measured, conscious, and rooted in self-respect. It honors your humanity, both your capacity to understand others and your right to protect yourself.